Hey, we are live, Facebook Live, right here every Wednesday at 5 o'clock Eastern Time and 2 o'clock Pacific Time. Myself, Hylan Slobodkin, Rabbi at Beit Tikva Messianic Congregation just outside of Seattle, Washington, and Stewart
We
Winograd in Georgia.
Yeah, and it's great to be here with everyone. We are excited to share with you today stories of courage and survival during the Holocaust. These are Jewish people who overcame the evils and hatred of anti-Semitism, and their stories need to be told. They're an inspiration to all of us. Of course, the suffering is beyond imagination, what they suffered and the loss they suffered during the Holocaust, but their courage and their bravery and their positive spirit after all of the horrors are truly an inspiration to all of us. And many of you know that my wife and I, we have been serving Holocaust survivors in Belarus, which is located between Russia and Poland. Some know it as White Russia or Belarusia. We have been serving Holocaust survivors in that nation for the past 25 years. And we have dozens of dear friends that have survived the Holocaust. Many of them are like family that are living in the land of Belarus. And we have also been serving Holocaust survivors in the land of Israel for about the last 7 years and have many dear friends that have survived the Holocaust in the land of Israel as well. And many are like family to us in the land of Israel, just very deep, deep friendships and relationships. And so also, Rabbi Hylan, the Holocaust is very close to you and to your wife, Rita. Share with us why that's the case.
Well, my wife's parents were both survivors in Poland, and my wife she talks about growing up under the shadow of the Holocaust. Her parents, friends, many of them, most of them had tattoos on their arms. They had stories. They didn't talk much about the Holocaust because it was so horrific. But it was an important part of it is an important part of our family history. And a lot of people didn't talk about it, as we last week we mentioned, until 1993 when Steven Spielberg produced his film Schindler's List. We'll talk about that a little bit later as well. And then survivors started talking for the first time, including Rita's family. And so that's very dear to our heart. And it's a part of who we are. It's a part of our makeup as a family. So we'll talk about some of those stories later. I, I just wanted to mention that people that the Holocaust is important. First of all, it's important to not forget man's inhumanity to man and the horrible thing that happened in World War II. 6 million Jews died, and about 5 million other non-Jews died as well at the hand of the Nazis. But it was the Jews he was trying to eliminate a whole race of people. That was genocide. And the other reason is that we're concerned is because Holocaust survivors are dying almost daily. You know, they're even the child survivors are now in their 70s and 80s.
And
And
90 and 100, we have survivors that
yeah,
we are friends with in their 100-year-old.
yeah, but I said even those who were little babies in the Holocaust, they're getting old too now. So basically, the survivors are dying at an alarming rate, and one day, not too far from now, they're all going to be gone. And so we have to minister to them and touch their lives as much as possible, and meet their needs. So there's this historical piece that it's important to not forget, but then there's this current present piece that there's still survivors alive today, and a lot of them are hurting, and that's why Reach Initiative International is doing such an amazing work meeting the needs of survivors.
Yeah, and we consider it at Reach Initiative International, we consider it a real privilege to be able to be friends with these wonderful survivors of the Holocaust. They're amazing people, and to serve them in any way that God allows us to and meet their needs. And we are really focused on meeting their needs. And I think you know that before the pandemic, we were making 120 home visits every month to survivors in Israel and in Belarus. We were also leading them on excursions once per month. We were celebrating all of the biblical holidays, Jewish biblical holidays with them, and helping them in practical ways. Some need help with activities of daily living and getting to the doctor and getting to the pharmacy and buying food and keeping their house together. So we have teams on the ground in Israel and in Belarus, just people filled with the compassion of Yeshua that are devoted to serving about 500 Holocaust survivors week after week after week. And even during the pandemic, we have not given up. We have adapted the ministry in order to meet their needs in ways. Even during lockdown in Israel, we have official permission to go and to bring food to them, to help them get to doctors, to encourage them, and so on. And I just want to mention that Purim is coming up, and we have a goal of during Purim, it's a time to give food and gifts to one another, especially to the poor. And majority of the Holocaust survivors we serve are living in poverty. And so we have a goal for Purim, which comes up on February 25th, to bring special gifts and fresh produce to 500 Holocaust survivors. And I'll just mention now, if anybody wants to join with us, we welcome you for a gift of $18. 18 in Hebrew means life, chai. For a gift of $18, you can join with us and bless one Holocaust survivor this Purim with a special gift and with a bunch of fresh produce, all given with the love of Messiah Yeshua. And so you can go to our website, Reachii.org, REACHII.org, if you want to join with us this Purim to bring joy and practical help to Holocaust survivors in Israel and Belarus.
I'm going to read just a couple of verses from the book of Esther. And so our viewers don't think this is just something we're making up. We just like giving gifts to people. But during Purim, especially from the book of Esther, it says they were obliged to celebrate the 14th day of the month of Adar and the 15th day, because on those days the Jews rid themselves of their enemies, and it was a month which was turned for them from sorrow into gladness and from mourning into a holiday, and that they should make them days of feasting and rejoicing, and sending portions of food to one another and gifts to the poor.
Yes.
So that's in the Bible, folks. That's a biblical mandate to share food and gifts with the poor. And as Stewart said, some of the poorest people on earth are Holocaust survivors living in poverty. It's really a shame. You think that they would, for all that they suffered, they should be taken care of better. But most oftentimes they're not.
Well, we're devoted to doing that, and Purim is another great opportunity. We do it week after week, but Purim's another great opportunity to show them that followers of Yeshua remember and care. And and Purim, of course, was another victory over anti-Semitism when Haman tried to destroy all of the Jewish people in the Persian Empire. And the Nazis tried to destroy, as you mentioned, all of European Jewry. And, when we talk about 6 million, that's a big number, and it's like a number beyond but it was really one person. Every number was a person with a name. It was innocent Jewish men, women, and children that made up that 6 million. And we want to share with you some stories of their amazing survival and amazing courage. I'm going to focus today on the Minsk ghetto because we lived in Minsk for 12 years. My wife and I moved there with our 4 children and lived 12 years, and we continue to have ongoing relationships and serve in the nation of Belarus. Minsk is the capital. So the Minsk ghetto was the largest ghetto in the former Soviet Union. Approximately 100,000 Jewish people were imprisoned in the Minsk ghetto, and the majority of them were murdered there. And when I say murdered, first they were humiliated, tortured, starved, and you can imagine what else. And so the majority of them were murdered in the Minsk ghetto. And you know, sometimes there are stories told, and all of my Holocaust survivor friends tell me, make sure people understand this, and this is what they want you to understand. Some people throughout history paint the Jews in the Holocaust as sheep just ready to go to slaughter. But the fact of the matter is, Jewish people resisted and fought. They were not like sheep going to the slaughter at all. And they fought in the Soviet forces, and they created underground movements to liberate their own people and to help and to fight against this Nazi killing machine. You know, and in every ghetto, there was a discussion amongst the Jewish leaders in the ghetto. How should we fight back? And so some decided that we should have an uprising from within the ghetto. And many of you know the story of the Warsaw Ghetto, that the Jews smuggled in arms, and there was an uprising from within the ghetto. But in Minsk, they made a different decision. They said, we are going to fight back from outside of the ghetto. Meaning what? Meaning that we are going to do everything we can to collaborate with the partisan forces that are living in the forests of Belarus, which were close enough to Minsk to escape the ghetto, and others in other cities of Belarus too. And so we're going to cooperate with the partisan groups, both the Soviet partisan groups, the Russian partisan groups, as well as the Jewish partisan groups that were formed. And their goal was not to have an uprising from within the ghetto, but to get as many people out of the ghetto, as many Jewish people out of the ghetto as possible, to join the partisan groups in order to fight against the Nazis, the guerrilla warfare that the partisans were involved in. And many of you have probably seen the movie Defiance. The movie Defiance takes place in Belarus. It's about one of the Jewish partisan groups led by the Belsky brothers. If you haven't seen the movie, you can, it's available on all of the streaming services. I encourage you to see it. It's a story of amazing suffering and amazing courage. And we have just story after story, but this is a great movie to illustrate. We have story after story of amazing suffering and amazing courage. And so I just want to tell you the story of a dear friend of mine. His name is Lova Kravets. He is a survivor of the Minsk ghetto, and he entrusted us with his story. We're going to publish it in a book that's coming out later this year. You can be looking for that as we tell the story of the Jewish people in Belarus, pre-Holocaust, Holocaust, post-Holocaust, and Soviet communist times, and then when they met us and their spiritual journey, many of them discovering that God really cares, even though it didn't seem that way in the Holocaust. So Lova tells us that all of the Jews in Minsk were ordered to relocate to the ghetto. And his dad begged his mom to let him go and fight with the partisans, but the mom kept Lova with him. And when his dad left and gave him a hug, that was the last time he ever saw his dad. He has no idea what happened to his dad. He was
How old was he then?
Lova was, let me see, let me check. He was 11 years old at that time. 11
He
years
remembered
old.
his dad then. Yeah.
Yeah. And so in the ghetto, men, women, and children were living desperate lives. And the beatings, the humiliation, the rape, the torture, and then these pogroms would happen. Pogroms were German actions where, for no reason at all, the Germans would just come into the ghetto and terrorize the people and shoot hundreds, if not thousands of them during this pogrom. And the Jewish people were forced to clean up after these pogroms. So you can imagine what young children like Lova were living through. But Lova was a courageous young man. He had a brother and one sister who died during one of the early pogroms in the Minsk ghetto. Died is not the right word. They were murdered brutally. And another thing that he had to go through, his mom, who would go out to work, the Nazis would assign Jewish people who were able to work to do some work. And, they got a reward. You know what they'd get? They'd get 5 ounces of bread. And oftentimes this bread was not only grain, it was mixed with sawdust and a little bit of watery soup. And so this was not enough really to sustain one individual, let alone, a family with children and sometimes their relatives. And so his mom went out to work one day and never came back. And little 11-year-old Lova never saw his mom again. So he was left alone with his younger sister. But
Wow.
Lova was a courageous young boy. I mean, I can't even imagine at 11 years old. I have grandchildren that are about this age.
Yeah.
At 11 years old, he has to figure out ways to survive. And so he was sneaking out to find food, sneaking out of the ghetto to find food and to hopefully connect with the partisans. And one day he did connect with the partisans, and listen to this. They gave him an assignment. They saw he was a young man of, he had a good mind and he knew how to get around at that time. He was streetwise, so to speak. And so they gave him an assignment because the partisans understood that the Nazis were going to kill off all the people in the ghetto eventually, and they were killing them off consistently. So they gave Lova assignment. They said, go back, get your sister and as many people out as you can. And Lova went back into the ghetto and led his sister and a small group of people out of the ghetto to join the partisans. Is this like amazing? This boy's 11, 12, and so many of these children are doing these heroic deeds while at the same time witnessing and experience horrific loss and suffering. And so to me, it's an amazing privilege to be part of Lova's life. And he has, we have an ebook called Love's Redeeming Power, his story, a Holocaust survivor story of love's redeeming power. And if anybody wants to get that ebook, just contact us, let us know on Facebook. Say you want Lova's story, and or contact us at Reachii.org, our website, and we want to send you his ebook so that you can have it and you can share it with others. And so these stories of pain, sorrow, suffering, and courage are amazing. And I'd like to hear, and I know everybody will be moved by the story that comes from your beloved wife Reader's family. Can you share with us?
Yeah. So Hitler, basically the beginning of the war, 1939, he moved into Poland and established Auschwitz right at the beginning, took over a Polish army barracks, and that became Auschwitz. Auschwitz, as we shared last week, 1.1 million Jews were killed in Auschwitz. But southern Poland, where a majority of the Jews lived in what was called Galicia, which stretched from about Krakow east to Lvov, a little past Lvov, almost to Kiev, in what's modern day Ukraine, was Galicia. It was the southern portion, mountainous, lots of rivers, just a beautiful, beautiful part of Poland. My wife and I have been there now 4 times in the last 6 years. So we've learned a lot in the last 6 years about her family. But Hitler in 1942, Hitler decided he was going to destroy every synagogue in Poland. So they started moving through every part of Poland, not just the cities anymore, not just Krakow, not just Warsaw and the other cities, but they moved into this area where Jews were living 10 families in this village, 20 families in that little village, a little town there and there. And they knew, they had heard stories about what was going on in other parts of Poland, but they thought it would never reach them. Well, when this move started in 1942, which was about 3 years later, the Nazis came into Rita's father's town, which is called Uluch, which is right on the San River, S-A-N, the San River, which for a long time was the border between Poland and Ukraine, Russia back then. And they came into town and they started rounding up the people. So Rita's dad ran up into the hills to hide. After a couple of days of being without food and water, he came back down and he was eventually arrested by the Nazis. He was taken to Plaszów concentration camp, which is in Krakow in Polish. And that was the camp, that was the model that was the camp that Schindler's List was modeled after, Plaszów. And it was a work camp. And then he was transferred to Częstochowa, and then he was transferred to Skarżyckie-Komieny, where they made ammunition. There was the stories that people would leave that camp yellow from the sulfur that was in the camp. And then he was transferred to Buchenwald and eventually to Mauthausen, where he was liberated first week of May by the Americans at Mauthausen concentration camp in Austria outside of Linz. He suffered horribly. He was in a firing squad and the German just opened fire with machine guns. And he, in the group, someone in front of him took his bullet. He fell down and pretended he had died in a pile of dead bodies, crawled out of this pile of dead people and went back into the camp. He got tuberculosis while he was in the camp. He lost one lung, and even to the day he died at the age of 86, he lived on one lung. Lots of stories, amazing stories that I could tell more about his life. Rita's mother, also in a small village about 20 kilometers from Uluch, a little town called Humniska. The Nazis came into that town and they said, we want all the Jews to meet tomorrow morning in the stadium. Sounds familiar. And Rita's grandfather thought, this doesn't sound good. So he went to a woman, a widow in town. He had a little general store, took a bedroom of his house, had a little general store. She was a widow. He would help her for many years, food, necessities, supplies. He went to her, he knocked on her door. He said, could you hide me and my wife and my 2 daughters for a couple days? She said, sure, as a favor.
Thank God.
So a couple days became 2.5 years. She hid them up in the attic of her house. Nazis came a number of times. They built a fake wall in their living room, and there was a hatch door up in the attic. If the Nazis came, they would open this hatch door, climb down a ladder, and they would stand in a space about 18 inches. So when the Nazis walked into the house, they saw a wall in the living room, didn't know there was another wall in back of it. And that's where they hid from the Nazis. 2.5 years they were in this attic. After the war, they survived, and Rita's dad, my wife's dad, was sent to a convent, a Catholic rehabilitation center in a convent on the southern tip of Italy, Santa Lucia, where he had gotten down to about 110 pounds. And he's a big guy. He had lost half his weight, and they were nursing him back to health. And Rita's mother was in a DP camp outside of Linz, a displaced persons camp called Bindermikel. And she saw a list of survivors, and she saw Rita's dad's name, Phil Rabbi. And so she packed a suitcase, and this is her story. She jumped trains and ate grass along the way, got to Switzerland, slid down the Swiss Alps on the snow in her suitcase. This is her story, and made it all the way to Italy. Got to Italy and found Phil alive, and she said, "I heard you're married. Where's your wife?" He said, "Well, I'm not married." And he said, "Well, are you married?" She says, "No, I don't have a husband." So he left the convent, went back to the DP camp outside of Linz, Austria, and they got married in the DP camp in 1940, about 47. And 2 years later, they came to the States in 1949. My wife was born in 1950. Her older sister was born in Austria in the DP camp. We went back to that camp. It's it's no longer there, but Bindermikel is now a suburb of Linz. So we were actually there. We took pictures, and so horrific stories. And there's lots of innuendos, as you can imagine. It'd be a great love story because they fell in love before the war. They knew each other before the war. The war comes and splits them apart. They have their two situations, surviving in an attic like Anne Frank, but worse. And then he's in 5 concentration camps, rehabilitating. They meet up together again. And they ended up moving to Los Angeles, where they worked very hard and had a life,
Yeah. These are just amazing stories of, despite the horrifying suffering, amazing stories of survival and courage. And I'm so glad that, we have those stories to tell. When you mentioned eating grass, it reminded me of Zoya, another wonderful friend in Belarus that survived the Minsk ghetto. She was 13 years old, and at 14, she escaped the ghetto, joined the partisan group, and she was nursing the leader of one of the Jewish groups, partisan groups. There are 2 or 3 of them in Belarus. And Zoran, who was the Jewish leader of this Jewish partisan group, had gotten wounded. And 14-year-old Zoya was working in the makeshift hospital where they lived in the forests, and she was nursing him back to health. And Zoya tells the story of losing so many family members and suffering. And when you mentioned grass, it reminded me of the fact that Zoya had mentioned to us that she was so hungry that when her mother boiled some water with some grass in it, it tasted so good. That's how hungry that people were during that time. And when Minsk was liberated in 1944, Zoya, a teenager, an orphan, she was determined to live and make a good life, and she did. And she's such a positive spirited person, and I loved going to her home, and she'd cook me all of this Jewish Ashkenazi food that was so delicious, gefilte fish and everything else. And she shared with us that she understands today that God protected her and kept her alive for a purpose. And both she and Lova, when they realized that it was a very Jewish thing to believe in Yeshua, because they saw this Jewish man, Stewart, and they appreciated the love they experienced from me and my wife Chantal and our teams. Uh, she made a decision that Yeshua is her Messiah, and she would call him, and so did Lova, and she would call him so affectionately Yeshuachka. It's an
Oh,
affectionate way to call somebody. If I call you, if I call Rita Ritachka, or that kind of thing, it's just an affectionate way. She would call him my Yeshuachka, and she's on this wonderful journey with Yeshua, who's brought healing to her soul, comfort to her soul, and assurance that he was with her during the Holocaust. He is with her now, and she will be with him forever in eternity. And there's so many wonderful stories like this. And it's just amazing to be part of their life and to be their friends. And Hylan, today, we're both aware, and many who listen and watch, we're aware that anti-Semitism is again the ugly, evil hatred of anti-Semitism, simply hating Jews because they're Jewish, no other reason, is on the rise again. And one of the horrifying manifestations of that is anti-Israelism, meaning being against the nation of Israel and the people, the Jewish people that live in Israel. Would you, we're coming to a close here, but would you just take a couple of minutes to share with us about that?
I would like to. I'm thinking, and we haven't talked about this yet, but because this subject of anti-Semitism is so broad, and it's been since the beginning of time. I'm wondering if we need to do just a whole program on anti-Semitism. We can talk about that, but
well, we did the roots of it last week, and if people missed it last week, we did the roots of anti-Semitism in Europe that led to the Nazi Holocaust.
we did
But
do that.
Purim's coming up soon. I think we're going to have to do something close to Purim regarding anti-Semitism, and we can touch more on modern manifestations of anti-Semitism then. But just real briefly, maybe anti-Israelism, the BDS movement here today.
Yeah. Okay. So the modern day anti-Semitism is morphed into what's called anti-Zionism or anti-Israelism, as Stewart said, anti-Zionism, which is basically anti-Israel. And the BDS movement, which stands for Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions Movement, it's a group, and their goal actually is the destruction of Israel. It's not just a political movement. We have some congresswomen in Congress with Muslim background, like Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib, and others that you've maybe heard of that are pro-BDS. What they're not telling you is that that BDS is in favor of the destruction of Israel. But what they do is they boycott, they divest, they have sanctions against Israeli goods, and they politicize farmers, and they stand in front of the UN and say the Israelis call the UN the United Nothing, because they do nothing to help Israel. In fact, most of the resolution, 90% of the resolutions in the UN are against Israel. There's a reason for that too, which maybe we can talk about some other day. And so modern day anti-Semitism is anti-Zionism, and the root of it is a hatred for the people of God. The root of it is for the people that God chose to bring his message of salvation and hope and redemption through a certain people group that have become hated from the beginning of time, which is satanic and demonic. So we could talk more about that as we get closer to Purim. I don't know what we're doing next week yet, but this whole concept of anti-Semitism is something that everybody needs to understand. And the thing about BDS, they're on every university campus in the United States right now, and they are promoting their anti-Israel propaganda. And one of their biggest ploys is calling Israel an apartheid state.
Yes.
Likening Israel to South Africa during apartheid, which is totally ridiculous because
it doesn't exist.
Palestinians are Knesset members. Palestinians are mayors of towns. Palestinians are citizens. They vote in elections. There's no apartheid. It does not exist. But that's
we have Arab Israelis and we have Palestinians. So there's a distinction, but we're going to dig into that.
That's true.
Yeah, we're going to dig into that for sure on another broadcast. But please note that anti-Semitism again is on the rise. And we who are followers of Yeshua and all good-hearted people, we need to take our stand against anti-Semitism and all hatred of people, all bigotry and prejudice. We must take our stand peacefully, but we must take our stand firmly against this. And even Holocaust denial is growing today, and violence against Jewish people and synagogues is growing today. We'll definitely dig into this some more, but I just want to remind folks that if you want to get Holocaust survivor Lova's story, we have an ebook for you. It's free of charge. Go to Reachii.org or ask for it on the Reach Initiative International Facebook page, where you'll also find the recording of this Facebook Live, and just request Holocaust survivor Lova's story, and we'll send that to you free of charge. And for those of you who want to participate with us this Purim to bless Holocaust survivors, we are inviting you to give a gift of $18 or more. $18 is chai in Hebrew, which means life. And we are going to be delivering fresh produce, special gifts, and the love of Messiah Yeshua to 500 Holocaust survivors in Israel and Belarus this Purim. So if you want to get in on that blessing, just reach out to us on Reachii.org.
Is there a deadline for that, Stewart?
What's that?
Is there a deadline for that, for those gifts?
Well, we want to do that by Purim, so do it as soon as you can, because Purim is on February 25th.
Right.
And so we'll be back with you next week, 5 p.m. Eastern time, 2 p.m. Pacific time, and you can figure out all the other times. And I just want to ask you to close us with a word of prayer, Rabbi Hylan.
Yeah, Lord, thank you for this this special opportunity to meet with my brother Stewart and to talk about the Holocaust, which is dear to both of our hearts. We know it's dear to your heart as well. And God, I pray that our listeners and our viewers, it would become special to them as well. We thank you for providing for us this opportunity, this platform. I pray you would provide for all of the survivors that Reach Initiative International and Stewart and Chantal are reaching, and others as well. There's other ministries touching survivors' lives in Netanya and in Haifa and in other places. We pray for them, God. We pray that your good news would go forth loud and clear wherever the message is taken. Use this time for your purposes in Yeshua's name. Amen.
Amen. Shalom and God bless everyone. We look forward to seeing you next Wednesday, 5 Eastern, 2 Pacific time. And Hylan, have a blessed week.
You too. God bless you, brother.